Hello everybody and welcome to another in our session of Coffee Break webinars. We're fortunate enough today to have Tom Lyes with us, who's the Director of Engagement at Lawyer Checker. Lawyer Checker obviously concentrate on security, both from a cyber perspective and also in the verification of bank account details and more widely across the Solve group with their cyber newsletters. We're all very conscious that with the move to home working, that cybercrime has now, I think in the eyes of most colps, taken over as the most important business issue for law firms. And increasingly, they're being asked to take responsibility for cybersecurity issues. I think, Tom, you can be obviously of great help to firms in just giving us some views and opinions on what you're actually seeing. What are the new threats that are emerging as far as you're concerned?
Hi, Paul. Firstly, thanks for having me. In terms of new threats, there's two that I really wanted to talk about. One is around mobile malware. So mobile devices are increasingly a top attack target for obvious reasons. More people are using their mobile devices, whether they be work devices or personal devices, to access work data. According to a survey from Security Intelligence last year, over 60% of organizations actually allow their employees to use their personal devices to access business data. But at the same time, only 11% of those have such plans to modify and monitor these devices. So it's really important that firms implement something called mobile device management. And that allows organizations to protect and control the devices while reducing risks and support costs. And these might not just be mobile phones, they could be laptops, they could be tablets, they could be mobile printers. It's really important that mobile device management is used because it will help solve some of the logistical issues. Lawyer Checker, we're a Microsoft first business, so Microsoft has something that you can use to manage this, which is called Intune, which is quite a popular mobile device management tool. But that's certainly something that we would recommend that businesses think about if they haven't already got in place. The other sort of emerging threat, which I suppose it is more a case of an iteration of an existing threat, is around business process compromises. So this is where cyber criminals are not identifying weaknesses or vulnerabilities in an application, but actually in the process flow of that business's operation. So this is where threat actors will take advantage of sort of systematical weaknesses and look to exploit them for financial gain. And these attacks require a significant knowledge of the victim's system and their operations to work, and they'll often begin with sort of a compromised system on the network, which cyber criminals can then use to observe processes and gradually over time weaken those links. And often the initial attacks are quite discreet, and even in the long run, they could be quite discreet as well. So what criminals might do is they could siphon funds by compromising an automatic invoicing tool and changing the bank account number that's populated into each future invoice, for instance. So they're becoming much more smarter in observing and recognizing weaknesses in firms' processes and systems. So they're the two that I would really pick.
Just thinking about that last one that you're talking about, Tom, I'm presuming that, with us all working from home and the fact that we're all using home Wi-Fi systems and not in the corporate environment that we were originally, where we were probably very happy with our security and the way that our cyber functioning was working. Have you noticed and seen that there's been a lot more challenge and that particular type of attack, is that a lot more prevalent?
Yeah, I think it's a lot more prevalent because a lot of existing processes would have been much more difficult to operate in this new working environment. So people have had to change their processes, which probably actually require the use of of more tools and software that there is potential for criminals to exploit. In terms of sort of home Wi-Fi, I can cover that. That's quite a common question that sort of people are talking about. And with us being a Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus assessor, it's actually something I would expect in the next year or two for the National Cyber Security Centre to start factoring in to their assessments, is to think about this a bit more. And one of the things that people ask is obviously how different is that to a corporate environment? And the short answer is that home networks are typically far less secure than a corporate environment, but less likely to be attacked. More often than not, they're in a default configuration and administered by a home user who's got little to small IT knowledge. Whereas in a typical SME, you'd have a commercial, fully secured firewall and a department or outsourced provider who will keep that up to date and secure, whilst keeping tabs on what is actually connecting to your network. And you'll have defenses in place to identify bad traffic and block suspicious links. In a home working situation, you've got no control over the user's networks, or quite importantly as well, what devices they actually have on there, which is why the use of VPNs is so important. And that's something that, as a firm, if you haven't got people connecting to a VPN, that should be high towards your cyber list of things to do. And it's impossible to know what devices as an employee has on the same network as their work laptop or computer, especially nowadays. Everyone's got hundreds of things potentially connecting directly to the internet, from light switches to fridges to iPads, etc. There have been in the past high profile cases of sort of smart home devices, so like Alexas, for example, being hacked in people's homes, usually because the passwords haven't been changed from the default setting. There are also numerous recorded instances, of consumer devices with pre-installed malware. So there are risks associated with the home networks, but there are benefits as well. So, for example, with an office, someone could look up the location online, sit outside with a rogue access point and immediately start intercepting traffic, or they could drop some bad USBs around and they could own the network that way. It's a single point of attack and more likely to be tested by criminals. Whereas with home networks, you tend to find they only usually have a few users and their traffic isn't really that valuable. And it's a lot more suspicious for cyber criminals to be sat in a residential street in a car with a laptop and their kit rather than outside an office building. So yeah, there are risks attached to them, but there are risks on both sides of the scale, whether you're in a commercial environment or a home network environment. So my sort of top tip around that is around VPNs, and make sure that you're using a VPN to secure that connection.
I think that's really helpful. Thank you, Tom, for that. I think it's quite interesting to hear the perspective that home Wi-Fi's, whilst they are vulnerable, perhaps are not targeted as much. So I guess there's an element of some level of reassurance, particularly for the utilising the VPN. From our own perspective, obviously, one of the most important aspects for us is around regulatory regimes and around how the regulators are viewing these things. So what have we seen as far as the regulators are concerned? Are they taking steps, or are fines being put out in relation to cybersecurity issues?
Okay, so I don't think we're seeing fines from a regulatory perspective. I think what the regulator is ultimately looking for really focuses on education. So they're looking for the incidents to be reported. And what they're looking for from firms is for firms to be open about their experiences, which the aim of that is to then aid the learning. And they're also looking for firms to demonstrate that they've got robust processes in place, and critically that the business is taking ownership. So I think the SRA obviously produced a thematic review around cybersecurity last autumn.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that they did comment on was that they found that firms who maybe outsourced their IT or didn't have the in-house expertise were very much a case of, well, that's looked after by our IT team. And I don't think you can say that to a regulator now. As a stakeholder at the top end of the business, you need to be able to explain what you're doing in this area, understand what the risks actually are, and be able to take ownership of it. One of the things that cropped up in a piece I did with the SRA was around reporting, and that people were unsure what to report around sort of cybercrime. The risk outlook states that data breaches that might be serious breaches or misconduct should be reported to us through our report team. And they also say, and this is the important bit for me, we are also interested in evidence of other cyber crimes that affects firms and their clients. These can be sent to our fraud intelligence unit. And that's the whole reason why the SRA scam alerts are there, to be able to educate people on the types of attack or the types of things that have happened, because there's a good chance they're not just targeting one law firm, and they're ultimately targeting multiple law firms. And going back to the review that the SRA did on cybersecurity, they commented that reports were not routinely made when clients were affected, but the firm had not been involved directly. For example, the really common instance of where clients are tricked to send money and information to a third party via the criminal using an email purporting to be the law firm. Although the SRA don't see that as a regulatory requirement, the information is really helpful for them in terms of their understanding and raising awareness in the market. They also found that 7 significant incidents were not reported to them out of the 40 firms that they visited. These included 5 incidents of ransomware. And the message that the SRA sort of received back, I think, was that firms were unclear whether the regulator was interested in those issues. So for clarity, I think, yes, they are interested in anything that is cyber related, because it all goes towards educating and helping the wider market. And I think it's really important that firms report everything. If you're unsure, report it is really the key bit. So I think summary for me there, it's not about fines, but more education and really making sure that as a firm, you own this sort of stuff and you drive it internally. Don't wait for something to happen.
I think that very much echoes our own position on most things, is record and report. And as long as you have some evidence of the reason as to why you took a particular action, it is always very, very helpful in respect of any challenge from any third party organisation, because although you may not have made the right decision, at least if there is a reason for the route that you took, that's of great support in evidential terms. These are very short coffee break webinars, Tom, but the thing that we like to take away, if possible, from these is just some very practical tips for firms on how they can help themselves, and you know, what external outsourcing opportunities are there for these sorts of things, and how beneficial can those be?
Okay, I think you can break this down into 2 parts. So you can look at what you can do from a cultural perspective. So this is really important. So this is focusing on people. And then I think you can break it down into what you can do from a technical point of view. People-wise, it's critical to train and retrain in a way that engages and sparks the curiosity of an end user. Although people are often a firm's biggest weakness, ultimately your long-term goal, or even medium-term goal ideally, is to make those people your greatest cybersecurity asset and your greatest strengths. So I think what people can do is, one of the things is cultural, it's lead from the front. So going back to what I talked about, ownership, I think directors, managing partners, really important for them to lead from the front where that's concerned, and consult the experts. So the National Centre for Cybersecurity are a really good resource for anything cyber related. They have user training on there, which is really good. It's completely free. So people can go on there and engage with that, and sign up to some of their newsletters as well, because there's really good content there. There are providers in the market that are starting to focus really heavily on cyber. So it's a company that I think is partnered with the Law Society that focuses very much on education and testing firm systems in terms of things like penetration testing and stuff like that. I think from a technical perspective, going through an external audit is really important. So at Lawyer Checker, we are Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus assessors. One of the great bits of feedback we get from our clients when we mark their assessments is that we come at that from a completely fresh and independent point of view. So I think the principle of that from a risk and compliance perspective is that you will audit your conveyancing files, you will audit your accounts team annually. Why would you not audit your IT in the same way? Depending on the type of firm you are, you may also want to look at things like ISO 27001. There's also a lighter version of that, which is called IASME Gold, which is for smaller businesses. I'd also really encourage firms to really engage with their IT partners, whether that be outsourced or in-house, to really collaborate together to make sure you're all singing off the same hymn sheet where that's concerned. And one of the things you can do with that is to make sure cyber sits on a board meeting agenda every month or every quarter. So I think, yeah, there's lots of different things you can do. I think you have to really have a real focus on the people. And then anything technical, I think you really have to have a focus on independent audit, fresh pair of eyes, to be able to give you a confidence as a business, not just as a team, that you're heading in the right direction.
Great, thank you very much, Tom. That's very much appreciated. I think that whole independent audit piece is being echoed throughout the risk environment, and I think it's been looked at very much not only from an IT perspective, but whether it's the finance aspect of businesses, and even coming into the insurance environment, the PII renewals. Now we're being asked to provide independent audit assessments in relation to those types of things. So I think it is helpful to be able to have that third party look at all sorts of aspects of your business. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today, Tom. And I'm sure people will have found it very useful to have some practical and helpful tips in relation to cyber security. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for having me, Paul. Really appreciate it.